Ms. Pennick is an attorney, retired in 2016 from the position Executive Director and Treasurer from the Field Foundation of Illinois, where over 12 years she had the direct responsibility for grant-making management oversight for approximately $60 million in the foundation's assets. So she knows what she's talking about, so we're going to tune in to her. From 1992 to 2002, Ms. Pennick was the president and CEO of the Leadership Council for the Metropolitan Open Communities, the only fair housing organization in the nation, managing attorney administration for the Chicago Transit Authority legal information request. Prior to joining CTA's legal department, Ms. Pennick was the assistant director of special grants with the MacArthur Foundation, where she designed and implemented a multi-million-dollar grant program for small emerging community organizations. How many of us are in that emerging phase? We're in the right place. She began her career in philanthropy at the Chicago Community Trust. We're familiar with that one too, right? As a third fellow and first female trust minority fellowship program. Please give a round of applause to Ms. Pennick. Absolutely. And if we would please hold our questions, I'm going to pass out index cards, and then we can ask those questions. We'll make sure we get those answers for you. Thank you, ma'am, for being here.
Have to have notes. So you can tell when you get old, you can't remember what you're going to say. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Philip Jackson, and thank you, Black Star Project, and thank you, Angelique, for the introduction. I want to step back on a little bit of an introduction that is not in my bio, and I do this, and Otis will know why, because he had me out talking to young people in Inglewood, where I grew up and where my heart is. One of those young people asked me to introduce myself as saying, born and raised in Chicago, grew up in Inglewood, graduated from Inglewood Public High School, and I have 3 degrees. That's it. That's it. I feel like, well, and he said, when I was leaving, I think I told you this, Otis, he said, please do that for us, because people don't believe that that's possible when you have the word Inglewood. So I represent them and myself here today. It feels like family. So many of you I know from past lives, be they in philanthropy or when I was getting in trouble, so I'm back to getting in trouble again. So don't tell nobody, although they already know. Given where we are today in this country and particularly Chicago, those of you who are here in the nonprofits that you're running or that you're in are a vital part of the struggle to preserve our humanity. And I hope my presentation will help you with that in that regard, because we need help from each other. We are all in this together. And if there's ever been a time for us to realize it, it is now. As a civil rights lawyer, and like most people, I believe words matter because words have power. So we need to say what we mean and mean what we say. But we all know that words are often used interchangeably, particularly now. So today, let's take a little time to examine the meaning of the words mission and purpose. Looked up online, mission is defined as an important assignment carried out for political, religious, or commercial purposes. Purpose is defined as the reason for which something is done, something is created, or something exists. So with these definitions in mind, let's look at nonprofit world. The nonprofit organization's mission gives our work meaning to accomplish our purpose. And our purpose is that which, if we can't achieve it, we may not need to exist. That's it. So what does that mean for your individual organizations? And the bio talks a little bit about some of what I'm going to say, but I want to give it depth and comparison. In 1992, I was honored and privileged to run the Fair Housing Organization created by Dr. King when he came to Chicago, the Leadership Council for Metropolitan Open Communities. And it had a specific purpose and mission: the elimination of racial discrimination in housing throughout the metropolitan Chicago area. To accomplish this awesome mission, the Leadership Council had several programs. One came out of a U.S. Supreme Court decision, the Troe versus Chicago Housing Authority, the country's first major public housing discrimination lawsuit. That Supreme Court decision, which found the Chicago Housing Authority guilty of systemic racial segregation led to the creation of the Leadership Council and running the Gautreaux Section 8 voucher program for over 20 years. And in that program, helping 25,000 families voluntarily move to more than 100 communities throughout the Chicago metropolitan area. In addition to the Gautreaux program, the Leadership Council had a community relations program that did fair housing trainings and conducted research, but it also had 5 strategically located fair housing centers that helped families of color to find and purchase homes throughout the Chicago area. But the program that without which the Leadership Council's purpose and as such its mission would have been highly negated was a legal action program. That program did fair housing testing. Anybody familiar with fair housing testing is? I know you would be. Of course you. Back then, and understand at the time this was started, the Leadership Council was the first in the country to do it and was threatened by HUD to be sued because it was illegal. Trained testers, black and people of color, primarily black at that time, but people of color and whites, to apply for an apartment. They had qualifications and they had background information, and the first person of color would go and apply for the apartment. Depending upon what would happen, a white tester would follow and apply for the apartment. Usually, well, not usually, the white tester had to have lesser qualifications than the black tester, so we knew we weren't looking at other factors, such as they didn't have a full-time job, or they just got a job, or they didn't have the same financial background. Depending upon what happened, what came from that test, the Leadership Council would then pursue to sue landlords, realtors, or whomever. And that was a big deal back in the 60s. But the legal action program also sued banks who refused to give mortgage to qualified people of color. And it also sued towns, municipalities, Addison, Berwyn, Burr Ridge. So it didn't, everything was on the table in terms of housing discrimination back then. So even with all the good work of the other programs, without the unique ability to sue discriminators at that time, the Leadership Council was unlikely to fulfill its overall mission. To give you a little more history on this, the Leadership Council basically was founded because when Dr. King came to Chicago, he focused on housing segregation. And when his nationally viewed historical march in Marquette Park so tremendously embarrassed Richard J. Daley, Mayor Richard J. Daley, he asked several corporate leaders to sit down with Chicago area civil rights individuals, not Jesse Jackson, he wasn't here then, not Father Flagler, he wasn't in it, but people like Al Raby and Bill Berry, who was the head of the Chicago Urban League, and other religious leaders, including Monsignor John Egan and Rabbi Bob Marks. So the Leadership Council was established back in 1966 with corporate, civil rights, and religious leaders on the same board committed to a mission of eliminating racial discrimination in housing. That same board approved and supported the development of a legal action program. We all know how hard it is to raise money today for programs and organizations. You can only imagine how hard it was back then in the 60s to raise money for a legal action program that may be suing some of the bank colleagues and people in the room, in that room. But even when I was there in the early 90s, corporate foundations still weren't that happy about funding the Leadership Council, or particularly the Legal Action Program. And only 1 or 2 independent foundations, the Field Foundation, and I wasn't there then, and the Community Trust were the 2 that were the most likely to be funding of the fair housing work, particularly as it related to lawsuits. So how would a program like that survive? Mostly it survived on its legal fees and the lawsuits that it generated and won. And at the time, it won a lot. For many years, the Leadership Council for Legal Action Program brought to trial and won more fair housing cases than any other entity in the country, including HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Of course, now, under the new HUD secretary, that would be kind of easy. But legal fees don't come in on a scheduled basis, and depending upon the case, sometimes collecting fees could take years. So given this scenario, how do you fund this mission essential program? Well, mostly by individual donations and fundraising events. For the Leadership Council, it was an annual luncheon, and even then, to get corporations, including some on the board, to buy tables, we never openly said that the money raised would go to the Legal Action Program. We said it would go into unrestricted revenue. Because the Legal Action Program was so important to the mission of the Leadership Council, and because getting legal fees took years, so with the approval of the Budget Committee of the Board, I developed two budgets. Budget A. Budget A was the good budget, the budget that projected fiscal year, receiving all the legal fees on time, getting grants and unrestricted money that would support all of our programs, but particularly the Legal Action Program. Budget B, or the backup budget as I called it, was the one that when those fees didn't come in or when foundation support wasn't what we had hoped for. So the board would approve first of the year, fiscal year Budget A, and if need be, and sometimes not even 6 months when the recognition was there as to what was happening, within a few months we would have to recommend a Budget B in order to avoid a huge deficit. And Budget B, unfortunately, had a lot of cost-cutting measures, including some layoffs, including in the Legal Action Program. But even then, when we went through Budget B, we were careful to see that we kept programs intact and that they would still run, maybe not the way we had hoped for, but they were still, they could still do the work. But we were also very clear that the Legal Action Program had to survive because at that time, the Leadership Council was the only organization in the city doing that kind of work. Without that, the question was, who are we and why are we? I say this because, and I think Angelique did a wonderful job of talking about philanthropy in that regard, because I think, because we have to understand that as nonprofits, you know, our purpose is not profit, but purpose. And our purpose is the basis of our mission, your mission. And having been privileged to work on the grant-making side as well as the grant-getting side, I know how hard it is to raise funds. But I also know the challenge of making grants to worthy organizations. The competition, probably now even more so than ever in the past, is intense. So I want to caution you that in raising the much-needed dollars for your programs, don't let your financial need drive you away from your purpose or your purpose-based mission. You must remain mission-driven, not money-driven. And that's sometimes easier said than done. Sadly, we are at a critical time in our country, much like we were in the 60s, where much of the responsibility for the well-being of everyday people, particularly marginalized people of color, the poor, and the working class, rests on the shoulders of the nonprofit sector. The good news is that unlike back in the 60s, there are foundations and leaders in the room as we have here today, and many corporations, including banks, corporate foundations, that are willing to support your work without infringing upon your mission. So I say to you, seek out the dollars that support your mission, but not determine your mission. I want to save a little time for question and answers. So, you know, let me just kind of end up with some words from one of my sheroes, also a lawyer, Marian Wright Edelman, president and founder of the Chicago Children's Defense Fund. The greatest threat to our national security and future comes from no external enemy, but from the enemy within, and our loss of strong moral, family, and community values and support, parent by parent, youth by youth, voter by voter, professional by professional, congregation by congregation, club by club, community by community, foundation by foundation, corporation by corporation, city by city, county by county, state by state. All Americans must commit personally and as voters to a national crusade of conscience and action that will ensure that no child is left behind. Only we, individually and collectively, can transform our nation's priorities and assure its future as we face a new century and begin a new millennium. This was taken from her book, The Measure of Our Success, A Letter to My Children and Yours, written in 1992. In my humble opinion, 26 years later, these words are as meaningful now and as powerful now, if not more, as they were then. Thank you. Questions? Because if you don't have any, I got something for you, so better ask me first.
Well,
Yes, sir.
well, I remember 30 years ago when I was a fellow in your nonprofit program.
You ain't supposed to put no age.
Huh?
He meant 10 years ago. No.
But on the subject of mission, I remember you teaching us all that we should be so committed to our mission that if we never got a grant, we would find some aspect of this mission-driven work that would prevail. And now to my disappointment often, many in the black community, I can only talk about black folks, because I'm black, I don't talk about black folks, become very disappointed and become disengaged because they didn't get a grant. Well, some of those folks probably didn't need to be in the mix in the first place, because that's your only motivation. And I'll be the first to admit that. But again, that has always stuck with me, Ari, and I would share that with all of you, beloved, is that you should be so committed to this work that if you got to fund it out of your pocket, and a lot of folks say that, I have to fund this out of my pocket. Well, that's what you're supposed to do if the money don't come. You're supposed to keep the thing moving if you're committed to mission and purpose. So that has always resounded with me, and I want to thank you for that teaching that impacted me, and I think all of us in that first class, that inaugural class.
One of my students. Let me, go ahead. Yes, no, go ahead.
Okay, well, my name is Marvin Netta Penn, and I'm with Global Girls. Global Girls has been around for 18 years. And the first 6 years, we got no money. I funded it myself because I just love what I was doing. And now we're pretty recognized. But I'm finding that I just diversify my income. I have to. And we get a lot of earned income now, and a lot of people come to me and like, you've been doing this for a while. And we have some funders who love us. Unfortunately, Field is not one of them. I apply every year, they turn me down every year. But I'm going to keep trying. Every year I keep trying. But Treehouse loves us, MacArthur loves us, CFW loves us.
But see, if MacArthur loves you, why you need the Field Foundation? I'm gonna be look. Let me be Chicago. No, but see, that's the problem.
That's from the wheels.
Let me just say this about mission and purpose, because I know what you do, and you do it well. But this notion that we have to be on everybody's plate, I think is a mistake, because if you got MacArthur with $6 billion, and I can say that because I worked there, you don't need a Field Foundation with what, 60 million? Please, we talking, and I'm saying it, not that Field, look, but put your priorities in order, and like I said, don't be money driven, be mission driven, and is Field Foundation gonna help your mission anymore?
Yes.
If you say so. If you say so.
No worries.
Yeah, please.
Thank you all. We want to make sure.
Because I'm a lawyer. I can talk all day. So really.
We say thank you with our round of applause, and Gloria would like to say thank you at an elevated level. So. Yes.